Well, good evening. I'm so used to being on in the morning. I almost said good morning, but wherever you are in the world today, I know there's some folks that watch regularly from Kenya, so you may be in the morning as you're picking it up. This is our first stream of a new program called Night Mike. It's a kind of a sister to our Tuesday morning program that we call Live Mike. And I have a very special guest for our first program tonight. I'm going to introduce him in just a moment, but I've got a couple of important pieces of house cleaning that I need to do. And the first one is this: I am not going to be on the air next Tuesday morning for Live Mike. I have to go out of town on business, and I would normally do it by mobile, but while I'm driving in my car. But I'm going to be in an area that doesn't have really, really good cell service, and I don't want to start something and have the cell service all messed up and everything. So we're just going to say that there'll be no live mic next Tuesday morning. However, next Thursday night we will be having night mic, and we will be having a really very special guest, my friend Phil Felton, who is the manager and bass singer for a Dove Award nominee quartet called the Envoys. I have been friends with the Envoys, been on stage with them singing, been friends for many, many years. Every time I go into the Carolinas, they live in the Charlotte area. Phil and I try to get together at Cracker Barrel and have a good meal either there or some barbecue place he likes. And so next Thursday night at 9 o'clock, I'll be having Phil Felton. We're going to talk about the state of gospel music. Uh, uh, and what it looks like in the world in which we're living today. Is it better? Is it worse? Is it just as good? Is it gaining ground? Is it losing ground? There's a lot of opinions about that. And I'm going to be talking to Phil Felton about that next Tuesday. I'm sorry, next Thursday night at 9 p.m. And then one more thing before I bring my guest on. On February 20th, I'm going to be interviewing Jean Marie Davis. Jean Marie Davis is the executive director for Branches Pregnancy Resource Center right here in Brattleboro. And Jean and Branches, we have found ourselves at the epicenter of the pro-life movement in America today. And you don't want to miss Jean's testimony. That will be February 20th at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. Jean Marie Davis. Don't fail to see it. You will love it. You will have a ball. So let's get down to business here tonight. I have asked my friend Jonathan Jaley to join us. Jonathan is a young man who lives down in the Cape Cod area. Jonathan, do you live in Bourne? Is that where your home is, or where?
Sandwich.
Oh, Sandwich. Oh, okay, that's even nicer. I like Sandwich. It's a nice. My wife and I, for years, loved to vacation on the Cape, and Sandwich is one of. Matter of fact, I think we have sandwiches there every once in a while at some little diner. We get off on the side road, and rather than Route 6, where you can take your life into your hands just to go
Right.
somewhere. But Jonathan is an author, and he's a father of four young people. Am I right to remember that you said you've got a son starting college here this next fall?
I do.
Wow. What's his name? Where's he going to school?
Judah, and he's still waiting to hear back from a lot of the places he
Oh,
applied.
okay. Uh huh. Well, boy, I tell you what, I was just thinking after we chatted the other night and I hung up, I thought, I remember the first time I met Jonathan and your sister Shauna and your mom and dad up in Northfield, Massachusetts. Your dad was speaking at a conference for me, and I don't think you were maybe 10 years old, 11 years old. If I remember right, you were just a kid. And here you are, an old man with your own kids. And
Right.
that's great. And an author in your own right. How did you get started writing? What's the whole story with that, Jonathan?
Sure. I enjoyed at a young age kind of just telling stories um, through the things that I was playing. With my sister, I would kind of just do impromptu storytelling using Legos or any kind of thing like that. And I always loved to come up with something creative that she enjoyed. Uh, and that kind of just grew into a passion that um, I wanted to kind of explore a little further. And then later on, uh, I think not until I was almost 30 years old did I actually start writing. I just kind of sat down at the desk and started putting together thoughts that were in my head, kind of remembering some of the things that I did as a child, kind of the stories that I
Uh-huh.
made up. And I just kind of started writing and then went from there. And then it kind of ended up taking on a life of its own. And from there, kind of ended up developing this a plot line that would extend through multiple books.
Uh-huh. And you call that the Allegiant series? Is that the series you're working on right now?
Yes,
You've got three books in that series, correct?
that's
Why don't you
correct.
tell us about them a little bit?
Sure. The first one um, kind of it focuses in on uh, this kind of scientist that works at a pharmaceutical company,
Mm-hmm.
and he ends up having quite the experience one night, and something kind of happens um, at the facility, and he's not quite sure what it is, but he ends up waking up in the hospital, um, not knowing what occurred that night, and then kind of the story takes off from there, where he begins kind of experiencing some strange things going on in his life,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a close friend that he um, reaches out to. That's also he's kind of a doctor as well, so he kind of does run some tests on him, and he thinks maybe there's some kind of strange things going on with him. Um, then it kind of throughout the first book, you kind of jump back in time um, to an earlier kind of trip that the scientist went on to the Amazon rainforest. And
Uh-huh.
while he was in the rainforest, there was a kind of some strange events that occurred during that time as well. And you kind of you wonder why you're being told this the story that happened previously. Um, but as the book goes on, you kind of start to see how the events that happen later on maybe be connected somewhat with what happened earlier on in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually later on in the third book, you get to see the perspective from someone else who was actually there in the rainforest with him.
Yeah, so all of these books are connected together. They're not uh, just separate stories. They're all one interwoven story.
Yeah, each one kind of has its own focus. The first one primarily you kind of get to understand Dr. William Xavier,
Hmm.
who's the scientist at the pharmaceutical company. You get to
Right.
really know him and one of his close friends. And then in the second book, you get to kind of know his close friend's son. Um, and then the third book focuses kind of like on a totally different story, but you start to see how they're all kind of interconnected.
Yeah. And what's the age group that you would be writing for here primarily? I mean, it sounds to me like something I'd like to read.
Yeah, it's primarily ages 9 and up. I read them to my kids when they were younger, and
Hmm.
they really enjoy them. And then I've had a lot of other people that have really just you know enjoyed reading the books. I have a lot of different um, things that are put in there that people can draw from.
Hmm.
The writing style is kind of more geared to a younger audience, but there's a lot of plots and things in there that people
Hmm.
might find interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Uh, okay. I was reading on your website today. You have to excuse me, everybody. I woke up in the middle of the night last night with a cold. I think courtesy of my granddaughters. But so I'm kind of. I woke up in the middle of the night with this fever and the chills and all of the garbage that goes along with that. But why? Uh, okay, you've always liked to write. You've always enjoyed writing. You remind me of a couple of my kids. I've got a son, Timothy, who was. We always used to say about him, we would go on long trips, and Timothy didn't need anything to entertain himself but his fingers. He could tell stories with his fingers, and they would talk to each other. And we used to watch him as we went down the road as he would come up with these elaborate stories, and always thought that was pretty amusing. But you would play with toys and Legos and write stories and everything. So you were always kind of bent toward storytelling.
Yeah, definitely at a young age, I love to kind of tell a story, craft an idea. And a
Hmm.
lot of it was just impromptu when I
Right.
was young. And
Right.
then kind of later on, I was like, you know what, I could really, write something about this kind of more with a structured plot and
Hmm.
tying characters together. And then it's like
Hmm.
I took those ideas and the creativity that I had when I was
Hmm.
when I was younger and kind of developed
Right,
a
right.
overarching theme and plot out of it.
Well, I'm a preacher, but when I preach, I'm often telling stories. I love to tell stories. I think that, as a matter of fact, I'm teaching a class on Sunday nights now called Understanding the Old Testament. But I'm trying to get my students to understand that the Bible is not a book of doctrines; it's a book of stories, and we see the spiritual truths in we see the doctrine or the theology, but it's really a story, and all of these wonderful spiritual truths are wrapped up in the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David and Solomon and right down the line. And I think when so many of us, Jonathan, we know all these stories in the Bible, but we're not able to connect them together.
Mm.
And when we can connect them together and we can see that they're all tied together and that God is writing this story and all of us have a part in it. So I love a good storyteller. I love somebody who can really, because you can teach so much important stuff in a story. And we happen to know someone who did a lot of his teaching through telling of stories, and that would have been Jesus. Most of the time, he taught by telling a good story. And it sounds like something. Now, why, if I were to ask you, why do you write? Why did you decide I'm going to write a book? You planning on getting famous or rich or whatever?
um, yeah, there's probably a few reasons I could point to. First is that uh, I think inside each one of us there's something that we long um, to explore and fulfill. Like we each have our desires, and there's a passion inside of us. And
Hmm.
one of my passions was kind of to draw out principles and truths through storytelling. And
Hmm.
just like you said, as Jesus did, we can see throughout the New Testament. I mean, a large percentage of the time that he spoke to people, he did it through storytelling. People were able to relate to it. They could understand the context of what he was saying. And I believe a lot of times you can make a a strong impact in people's lives through storytelling, where a story can be captivating, exciting, but you can also find some truths and some truth through that
Mm.
storytelling. So that was, I think, one of the first reasons that I kind of got into writing, because it's an avenue through which I could um, release my passion to
Uh-huh.
kind of talk about those principles and those biblical ideas in
Hmm.
a way that's kind of melded with my personality and what I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And secondly, um, I find it just really enjoyable to create something where you find yourself being pulled into a world um, that you could you're creating yourself this narrative, and you almost get pulled into it yourself. Where,
Yep.
where I'm writing and I'm like, man, I want to know what happens, but I haven't written it yet. Um,
Absolutely.
and it's a great experience, a great learning experience as well. Um,
Yeah.
to be able to look at what's the end goal that I have for this book, and how am I going to get there, and then what kind of things do I want to impart to people along the way. So
Hmm.
it's a challenge at the same time.
Now let me ask you a question. Do you outline your books pretty specifically? Do you know where you're going when you start writing, or are you just as surprised as everybody else when you get to the end?
Well, it's funny because when I started writing the first one, I had no idea where I was going, no idea what I
Hmm.
was doing. I just knew that I needed to start writing.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that might be the case for a lot of people when they first start, unless you know, uh, maybe not everyone, but that's kind of how I when I first started, I just had to start writing it down on a page, and that the first book, kind of first draft anyway, ended up being just all my ideas that just kind of came out, and then I ended up redoing a second and third edition, kind of changed a few things, and once I had an idea where I wanted to go in the second book, then
Hmm.
I started to realize that you know I got all these ideas and things, but now I need to really start crafting where this is going to go,
Yeah.
um, so I don't kind of run off the rails and get lost in the story. So now I'm definitely working. Um, Now sometimes I'll work, kind of from the end to the beginning. I know kind of more where I want to go. Um, in fact, I have an idea of where I want the whole series to go. Um,
Yeah.
and now it's working back to each book and what's my end goal for each book, and how I'm going to get there. But the first book was kind of a just let it all go out and then go back and fix it and put it together.
Well, I'm privileged to be a part of two different Christian writers groups, and I get to hang out with a lot of editors and agents and authors and all of those things, and it's amazing how different people are. I know when I first started writing, I had no idea where I was going. I just sat down with my computer and started to go, and it just kind of emerged out of me. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever feel like you're writing yourself into the story? Are there characters in there that really could be, if we look deep enough, that would be Jonathan Jaley?
Not any particular character I would say
Mm-hmm.
that would like personify me, but I think some of my personality traits could be found in a few different characters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Other people that I know maybe drew some from there. Um, so not in particular, but there could be themes or things that happen, experiences with a character that I've related close to. So I had kind of a insight in how to kind of craft that particular event, because it was something that either I went through similarly, um, and so yeah, not any one particular character, but definitely plays a role
Mm-hmm.
into how things play out.
Yeah, yeah. I know that I it's writing is a craft. I mean, it really is an art. It's something that some people are suited for, and others are not. I think it's something that's inside of you that just has to come out. I frequent I'm think you're familiar with Sight and Sound Theater down in Lancaster,
Yes.
Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've seen any of their productions or not,
Yeah.
but their storytelling is phenomenal. I
It
mean,
is.
they take a biblical character and they form a story around him. Not all of it's from the Bible, because there's most of the time there's not enough information to just do a strictly biblical record of Joseph or Daniel or Noah or any of those things. And so they I guess extrapolate. They just kind of push it out with this character, and they develop a 2 hour musical around these characters. But their storytelling is phenomenal.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And I know when I take a couple of groups a year down there, and when I bring people home, their usual response is, I think I really understand who this character is now, and because they can see it in this storyline. I think the ability to tell a good story. I just saw Gene Davis come on here. Now Gene has got a young preteen by the name of Jonah, and it made me think that I put a little ticker along the bottom there that tells people how to go to your website and take a look at your books, because I think those books would be something that a kid like Jonah would really really enjoy. And there's so much out there being foisted upon our children in the public school system. I'm just really grateful for somebody who's writing something that is moral. Is
Yes.
that the word that I'm looking for? That has some sense of moral sensibility that can kids can read. And I know my son Brian, who's 51 now, when he started school, he didn't read. He didn't want to read. He didn't like to read. He didn't want to learn to read. It was very, very. Gene says she's going to go check it out. You ought to, Gene. But just didn't read. And then all of a sudden, he just exploded. And I talked to his teacher. He was in some kind of expanded class, and I said, "What happened to Brian?" She says, "Well, I just found out what he liked to read, and as soon as he found something he liked to read, the motivation there to read was there, and he went from reading nothing to reading Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and all of those things, and just in a heartbeat." So I think if we can get, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you to come on, was that if we can provide our young people, and particularly our preteens, with something that is going to be something they would like, an adventure like you're writing adventures, that they would really latch onto them and learn valuable principles out of these well-crafted stories.
Mm.
And I think that's great. You also on your website you talk about, I don't know what your mission is. That the first line in it, I'm just reading some notes I printed off here, is do what you were created to do. And then there's another one: inspire greatness and seek truth. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Where did that come from?
Um, I think one of the things that kind of inspired me to write was kind of looking at what are the things that I was created to do.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of times, as we grow up or we're around, particular people for a long time, um, we can we can unintentionally um, start to feel like we need to become like someone else, or do live in the shadow of someone else. If there's expectations or whatnot that you feel like are upon you, even if there aren't any, I think it's really important for each of us to know that we've been created for a particular reason. God has a particular destiny for you and something that He's called you to do that no one else can do. And
Absolutely.
it doesn't mean that, if there's another writer, well, I can't write because someone's writing. No, that God's called you to write, a particular story that no one else has written before, or God's told you to speak in a certain way that no one else has spoken that way before. And that's why I think that you know it's important to do what God created you to do, not
Yeah.
what God created someone else to do.
Yeah, I tell you a quick story. I didn't have a very good childhood when I was growing up, and never knew my father. Lived with a single mom who had some real issues and things, and I kind of felt like I was always on the wrong side of the tracks. And a young pastor kind of friended me and put his arm around me and led me to Christ, and became that father figure. But I was at summer camp, and in a Bible study at summer camp, and the theme of that day was from the book of Ephesians, and the teacher read Ephesians 2:10, which says, "We are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, unto good works, which He has already prepared for us to do."
Mm,
That was an amazing revelation to me, because for the first time in my life, I looked at myself as something other than an accident. My mom got pregnant out of wedlock in
mhm.
1948. It wasn't particularly fashionable then, and I grew up with a lot of people, even in my own family, who kind of looked at me as an accident, and looked at myself that way. That I just was somebody's goof up. And when I heard that voice, when I heard that verse, it was almost like a voice speaking to me. That's for you. You're my workmanship, and I created you for
Yes.
specific things to do. Is that the way you look at your writing? That's what you were meant to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, not the only thing, but it's definitely something that I feel God, put on my heart, and that, um,
Hmm.
and when God puts something on your heart and He's called you to do something, um, it should be, and it probably going to be something that you're going to enjoy doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The sometimes the Lord puts us in scary situations, but He only puts us in things that we were specifically created to do. I like one of my life verses is in the first few verses of Jeremiah, where God says, "Before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. I
Hmm.
knew you by name, and before I even brought you forth out of her womb, I ordained you to be a prophet to the nations." And that's a pretty amazing thing when we realize this is what God created me to do. And there's so many people who never get to realize that in their life. They get caught in, as you said, other people's expectations of what they ought to be doing, and what would be best for them. And unfortunately, as parents, sometimes as parents, we're thinking about, oh boy, I hope my son or my daughter goes to a good school and gets a good job and makes a good income. And a lot of times the things that we're called to do don't particularly meet those expectations. They
Hmm.
and kids can get kind of distracted or pushed off course, and never really realize what God called them to. I knew at 13 that God had called me to preach. I mean, that was so clear to me. Even as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, I knew what God had called me to do, and it's kind of like a guiding light for your whole life. This is what I was created to do, and I think it's exciting. So do what you were created to do, and then the second thing on your motivational stuff is inspire greatness. Tell me about that. What do you
Yes.
mean by that?
Um, I think one of the books that I read, which um, is actually for business. It was a book called Good to Great,
Hmm.
and I think it was an excellent book that talked about how a lot of businesses that are run are good businesses, and they can be successful. They can do, they can do well, but then there's a certain level where you take it to the next level, and you really put the work in, and you move to greatness. And I
Hmm.
think first you have to be good at something. But if you discipline yourself, and you work hard and you really work at your craft, um, then you can there can be a level of greatness that can be achieved, and
Hmm.
not greatness necessarily in the way that the world would see it as far as making a lot of money or being famous, but um, inspiring inspiring greatness, meaning that um, truths and principles are being revealed, um, that take you that can take you to the next level in your life, um, where the things you learn either through working through getting better at what you're called to do by working diligently on it, uh, that there's a level of success that you'll find in your life when you focus on that and work hard at it. When you
Yeah.
do that, it helps other people around you to be inspired
Mm.
to do the same thing. Um,
Right.
I a lot of the inspirational writers that I've pulled from were C.S. Lewis is one of them. Another one was Frank Peretti. I
Love
really
Frank
enjoyed,
Peretti. Love Frank Peretti.
I really enjoyed his books like This Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness. Those two books probably made a significant impact in my life, and I really drew from those. Um, but just from purely a writing style, I knew that for them to get to the point where they could reveal so much truth in what they wrote
Hmm.
was something that I wanted to do as well. Um,
Right.
but I knew I'd have to work at it. It's not something that would come easy or that would, um, you know, I would get right away. But
Right.
something that I was willing to challenge myself with. Well, I'm not going to be, I'm not them. I'm not going to be the same exact writing style. But God has something for me, and it inspired me to get better and better at my writing. And that's where I hope, you know, anyone who picks up my books and reads them, um, that they would be inspired um, in many different areas of life.
Hmm.
Number one, that they would seek the truth, and the truth being Jesus Christ. And a lot of my books allude to that, but they don't specifically reveal it early on.
Hmm.
And there's similar to a lot of the writing styles from the authors that I've enjoyed, where they create narratives that are um, parallels to biblical truths and worlds that kind of speak to the spiritual realm. But it's not something that someone will look at and be like, oh, this is he's talking about this about Christianity. But then once you really look at it, you're like, wow, these are truths that you find in the Bible,
Yeah.
and that's what
Chronicles of Narnia, to,
yes,
to
that's
be specific. Amazing spiritual truth. And I want to go back to Frank Peretti. When I first read This Present Darkness, I said, this is the master storyteller here. And
yes,
yet there is so much powerful. I often still, even after all these years, I recommend to people who are going through spiritual struggles,
mm,
read This Present Darkness, read Piercing the Darkness, because you will learn things about the spiritual realm that you have not been aware of. And I think that was one. Yeah, Robin says, just don't read it at night.
right,
But yeah, I think if you can be inspired by people like that. Now, I'm I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick up all three of your books and read them. I'd like to review them, and so that I can recommend them to people. I don't recommend things that I haven't read, but I'm going to do that
mm,
because I want, moms and dads have to start seeking out good reading material for their children, and it has to be at an early age. I know my wife does preschool, and because of her influence on my granddaughters and all of my grandchildren who have been taught by her at one point or another in their life, they love to read. She inspires in them a desire to read. As a pastor, I am truly troubled at the number of people who carry a Bible around, but they never read it.
mm,
They never read it. And I think part of the problem is, and this is my latest thing, part of the problem is they're looking for the doctrine and they miss the story. And if you don't grasp the story, it's God's story, and it's written and rewritten through all of these amazing characters. And I shared with someone the other day, they were talking about, they had a very dysfunctional family. I said, you should read about Jacob. Jacob had a pretty dysfunctional family,
yeah,
and yet was right in the lineage of the Messiah. And so so many people don't read the Bible. They don't. They read books about the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and but they don't read the Bible, and they don't know what the Bible says. The only thing so many Christians believe understand about the Bible is what they learned sitting in church on Sunday morning, and they've never digested it for themselves. And
Right.
I think that's an important thing. And guys like you who are writing good stories for young people, I think can have such a tremendous impact on a generation. This generation that's growing up today are not readers; they're
Mm-hmm.
watchers.
Mm-hmm.
They've got their face stuck in a screen all the time, and all of the and we all know when we think about it how accurately movies and television portray life. Not at all, you know.
Right.
And but everything is visual. And I'm a techie guy. I've got every kind of gadget known to man, but I love to get a good book in my hands. That's just been that was ingrained in me. So I really want to encourage you, keep doing what you're doing, because we need more guys like you who are going to uh, put stuff in our children's hands. And I think that preteen, young teen group is the place to start, even before that, but particularly with them, because most of them have only deal with something that's got a game on it, you know, that they can play and they can shoot or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. And they're missing the story of life. They really, really are. So I really appreciate your type of writing, and I want to encourage you to do it. Now, you got any? What's the next book? What's we've got the what was it? What they are the give me the names of the book again in this series. The first
So
one, yeah,
the first one is The Chemist.
the chemist. That's the pharmaceutical guy, right? Okay,
Yes. Yep. And then the next book um, is The Acrobat, which is it's this a story around the son of the close friend of the chemist.
okay, mm-hmm,
And then the third book is entitled The Warrior,
mm-hmm,
and it's the kind of it follows the story of a young boy um, in a tribe in the Amazon rainforest.
okay,
And it's called The Legend of Makulele, and
mm-hmm,
it's it's somewhat based on a legend that if you look it up, there was a legend of two warring tribes that were in the Amazon rainforest, and there was a day that one of them was attacked, and there was a young boy um, that tried to defend his village with a pair
mm-hmm.
of sticks.
Uh,
He was the one that stood up and tried to defend his village, and the legend I think goes that he wasn't successful, but his legend kind of lived on, and they made a traditional dance out of it. I kind of took that legend and put my own spin on it, um, and it's that same story um, where a young boy kind of has a fascination with sticks, and
uh-huh.
ends up trying to defend his village. Doesn't completely succeed. You'll have to read the story to find out what happens after that.
Yeah, don't tell us the whole story, but yeah, I looked at that. I kind of looked at that and went, that sounds like. Of course, one of my favorite stories came out of the Amazon, and that was the End of the Spear with Nate Saint, Jim Elliott, and those
Yes.
people,
Yep.
and Min Kai and all of that group there. That was an amazing story, and I encourage a lot of people to read the book, The End of the Sphere, because there's so much in there that's not in the movie. It's always, you know, you'll hear people say, well, the book was much better because there's much more detail in it. And I don't know if you've read The End of the Sphere or not, but
Yeah.
it's written by the 8-year-old boy who was there when all of that happened. And pretty amazing story. And I think stories are so very, very important. And we've lost, I think, in so many ways, we've lost the art of storytelling, really, in
Mhm.
so many ways. And the people who, many of the people, what is it? Robin says, the screen has killed the dreamer's mind.
Yeah.
And there may be something to that, Robin, that when we're always looking at somebody else's dream, somebody else's imagination, that our ability to imagine gets stunted. And one of the wonderful things about a book that is so much more powerful than a movie or a TV program is the book allows you to create your own images.
Mhm.
And everybody that reads your book will find some things in that book that probably nobody else sees because they have their own imagination, they have their own vision of what's going on. And I think that's one of the powerful things about a book. And that's, I'm really happy to see young men like yourself. Um, I like, excuse me, uh, storytellers. I can, boy, I'm getting old when I can't think of Tom Clancy.
Yes.
Uh, I love Tom Clancy stories, and I'm sure the CIA would like to take him out behind a barn somewhere, and not come back. But he writes very very intricate, very very intricate
Mhm.
stories, and I've seen the movies. I've seen The Hunt for Red October and all that stuff and everything, and they're good, but they're not like the story. They're not like the book because
Yeah.
it activates something up here and it activates something in here. So, what's your next book? What's next in the series?
Yeah. So what I was kind of working towards, uh, something a little bit similar to. I'm sure you're familiar with, the whole Marvel Avengers.
Oh yeah,
Thing
yeah.
been very popular for a long time, and earlier on, I was, I enjoyed it as well, and my kids loved to see them. And as they went on, I think they declined a lot in value
Oh yeah,
in
yeah,
production, and well, it's been, a year or two, and really haven't seen any more of them. But for a number of reasons,
yeah,
and for one being just they don't, they don't have the quality, and the truth and the lessons of them are not anywhere as what they used to be, and a lot
right,
of the
right,
messages they're sending out there, not something I agree with. Um,
yeah,
but anyways, um, I like the concept of a world that, you read about multiple different characters in different books, and then they start being brought together. In the fourth book, is that's kind of what happens, is you see all the different characters that you've met through the first three books. You
uh
kind of
huh,
see them pull together, where they end up having to work together as a team.
yeah,
Um, and that's kind of something I was going to explore through the rest of the series. Um, I'm looking at kind of a 12 book series in total. Um, it may or may not change, but having a, two or three books, probably about three books where you, in between, where you get to, you're introduced to kind of some new characters,
hmm
um, and then they come together.
yeah. That's fascinating. Well, it's really one long story with a lot of different features to it. But well, I know I've got three sons who are frustrated movie critics,
Mm.
and so I don't go to the movies. There's a couple of movies that I go to see.
Yep.
I will go to the theater to see a movie if it's a new Star Trek movie. I'll go see it. I'm pre Star Wars. I like the Star Trek stuff, and I'll go see that. But I'm not big into the movies. But sometimes when they're all together at the house or something, the three of them will get into very heated and animated discussions about the latest Marvel, universe and stuff, and
Sure.
they take it all apart and they try to read between the lines and see what's going on. And they all have their difference of opinion, and if a movie has a value, that's where it is. Not just to go mindlessly eat a box of popcorn and see a
Right.
movie that has no value to it. And uh, I've never been a fan. See, I grew up with Superman comic books. I grew up with
Mm.
DC comic books. I'm pre-TV, but
Yep.
the old comic books, the old, of course, I've always been a reader. I love to read, and I love good good writing, and I love good storytelling. I'm particularly drawn to those guys who can weave a story that captures you, that causes your mind to to come alive, and you can't. I know reading Peretti's books, I was so disappointed when I got to the last chapter. I just wanted it to go on and on and
Yeah.
on and on.
Yep.
You can't have that. You've got to have a climax. You've got to have an end to it somewhere. But I just loved those stories so very much that I was so disappointed when they ended. Now, there's another book that you have that's called "I Love You More Than." Is that the name of it?
Yes, I
Yeah.
love you
What?
more
Tell
than.
us about that.
Yeah, so this one actually kind of came out of nowhere. I guess um, I would kind of tell some stories to my youngest daughter, putting her to bed, and I don't know how it started, but we ended up with this kind of silly phrase where I would tell her, "I love you more than," and then I would kind of just make up some kind of silly phrase. A lot of times it didn't make any sense, but it was something she found hilarious and
Yeah.
really enjoyed, and started taking off. So, every night she'd ask me, "Oh, tell me more. I love you more than," and
Yeah.
so
Right.
I would, kind of make up, "I love you more than," a caterpillar in a tree, um, that's purple, and kind of just elaborate on it more and more. And
Hmm.
she thought it was so funny. She loved them. And then I think there was one night where I think my wife might have mentioned um, about she really loves these, and I thought, I wonder, I thought I could put something together on this,
Hmm.
and so I just started writing down some ideas, thinking how could I do this in a way that maybe other people might enjoy reading to their kids, uh,
Right.
and then I kind of had this idea on, well, why don't I write it in such a way where people may be able to pull out some truths through
Yeah.
silly sayings.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I love is, allegories. Like my whole Allegiance series is going to end up being an allegory, so, similar to Crimes of Colonial. Um, with this book in particular, I wanted each little saying to have someone think, well, is there something deeper behind that saying than just the
Yeah.
silly phrase?
Right.
Uh, and so I worked on coming up with some phrases, and reading it to my daughter. Um, she thinks they're a silly phrase, and she laughs at it. She loved me reading the book to her.
Uh huh.
There's some truth behind each of those sayings that I know is being planted as a seed.
Right. Right.
And I that's what I would hope that anyone reading the book would see as well. That there's some value behind that. That you can
Mhm.
explore a little further. That there's some truth in there, but it's being shared in a humorous and enjoyable way that you
Yeah.
can read to your kids.
Now, is the book illustrated at all?
Yeah,
I could
it's
see
based
that
on
there was a
a true
very
book.
very lovely color, lots of color and is it illustrated throughout?
Yes,
And
it's
and
full,
how old
full
how
page
old
color.
is how old is your daughter?
She just turned 7
She
a
just
few
turned
days ago.
7. Yeah, a few days ago. So this would have been when she was a good bit younger that you were reading these stories to her. Yeah.
Yes, yep. She probably
Yeah.
would still enjoy them now,
Yeah.
but
I don't know, it
yeah,
sounds like I'd
she's a
kind of
couple
enjoy
years
them.
younger than them.
Well, I have a 2-year-old who lives upstairs from us, and she comes down quite often and grabs a book and climbs up in my lap and hands me the book and wants me to read it to her. She loves books, and I think we're always looking for books that will spark their interest and bring some delight and some happiness and some truth to them. So let's see, what else did I want to ask you? Um, in somewhere on your website, I picked up this phrase: faith, family, and freedom. These are ideals worth fighting for.
Yes.
How does that find its way into your writing or your life?
Well, yeah, it's definitely something kind of encompasses my life. I think first and foremost, you have to be grounded in your faith in the Lord, and
Hmm.
and when you do, um, a lot of other things start to make sense and come together.
Hmm.
Obviously, things don't always go great all the time, but when your faith is on the rock, then the storms, you can make it through the storms.
Yeah.
Uh, and and I think that the next important thing is the family, and and the reason why, I think you start with faith and then family. I mean, you can tell, particularly nowadays, like where is the enemy attacking, um,
Hmm.
and a lot of times the enemy isn't going to attack directly at your faith. Um, Sometimes he will, but a lot of times he'll attack from the side, and he'll weaken the structure of the family, and he'll attack things on the side, and you begin to lose faith because of that. And the enemy's smart in the way that he attacks is not always, face directly to your face, but from
Right.
side and circumstances in your life. So I think the family is a fundamental value, and the destruction and the devalue of the family is something that we have to stand against.
Right.
And the
Right.
best way to do that is to promote the true values of the family, um, which is grounded, of course, in the Word of God and in your faith.
Right.
And then moving on from there, the freedoms that we enjoy in this country, the freedoms that we enjoy because of our faith in the Lord, um, you know, those freedoms are also coming under attack, um,
Yeah, boy.
and it's we have to take a we have to take a stand and stand up for our faith, for our family, and for our freedoms. And it's it's something that kind of alluded to in my books in indirect ways where,
Hmm.
you know in the first book, it kind of, just to kind of summarize it, um, it kind of reveals that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we think,
Yeah.
whether it's pharmaceutical companies, um, the government, or whatever. There's things happening that we don't we don't always see, the level of spiritual impact that's going on
Right.
behind the
Right.
scenes.
You
Um,
know, there's just two things here, Jonathan. I just want to maybe get your do excuse me, please. First of all, the enemy started attacking the family right in the garden. I
mm,
mean, he understood. God started with a family. He
yep.
created a man and a woman. He said, "Have babies and replenish the earth and have dominion over it." So that was the point of attack right off the bat. I mean, Cain killed his brother. There was this, and the family dynamic. I mentioned Jacob a little while ago and how dysfunctional they were as a family, and David's own family, his children tried to, it just this
Yep.
warfare all the time, and our families are a point of attack. And you look at what's going on in America today. It is a huge attack against biblical family values, God's description of what a family is, and that's been all rewritten, and that's antiquated and out of date. And now we're going to rewrite all the rules, and we can see the destruction.
Mm,
We talk about gender dysphoria, and that really means confusion. And there is
absolutely.
so much confusion because the structure of the family has been ripped apart, and so I'm really happy to hear you say that because I think that it is paramount. I tell people all the time, we've been focused on saving America. What we really should be focused on is saving our families. America will fare very well if we have strong families,
Yes.
but if we don't have strong families, then it's just like I teach that the church, the family is not a reflection of the church we attend. The church we attend is a reflection of us as a family and all of the collected families that are there, because that's the real root. I really believe the family is the center of the kingdom of God in the earth, and God meant it to be that way, and we've kind of jobbed it out to the church, and it's not the way God established it, and that's not what He means for it to happen. So the church has suffered, and certainly the family has suffered, but I'm dying to ask this question because it just occurred to me. Your first uh, character, and if I can say corporate entity in your first book, is a pharmaceutical company. And
Yes.
I don't think there is an industry that has come under more scrutiny in the last, particularly during COVID
Right.
and all of these things. And we talk. I mean, the buzzword around is big pharma. I think a lot of people really see one of the biggest corporate enemies of the way of life that we have as human beings is drugs.
Absolutely.
And I'm
Yeah.
not talking about the illegal kind. I'm talking about
Right.
the kind. And we look at, COVID came along, and then all of a sudden we've got these pharmaceuticals developing all of these drugs, and you have to take them. You're going to kill everybody if you don't take them. You're going to
Hmm.
die if you get this disease. Turns out it was all a big lie,
Hmm.
and probably as many people died from the results of the shot as did from the actual COVID. My wife and I had COVID twice,
Mm.
and
Yep.
and uh, and we came through it pretty good. And I've talked to doctors whose jobs depend on them promoting those, and you can see the sadness in their eyes because they know this thing is a lie. I have a heart condition that requires me to be on a couple of conditions that require me to be on medications, and they are astronomically expensive. I mean,
Hmm.
astronomically. If I didn't have insurance, I've got one drug that I take. It's $2,900 a month
Wow.
retail.
Huh.
Retail. If I didn't have insurance, I mean, it still cost me a boatload, even with good insurance. But I just find it fascinating that your first corporate character is uh, a pharmaceutical entity. You saw Andy came up. He says, "I think it's the FDA." Of course, Andrew, you're a conspiracy theorist, and you know it.
Well, that's definitely a theme running through my books is a lot of conspiracy theories.
Well, you know what? I have a good friend who says, uh, uh, I may be paranoid, but that doesn't mean they're not watching me. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think that what's going on behind the scenes in all of uh, our world right now is pretty scary. And the
Hmm.
average, Andy says, I prefer the label realist. Uh, you may be right, Andrew, but this is. I'm sitting here and all the chats we've had leading up to this and everything, and reading of it. It never occurred to me in this book of series that a series of books, the very very first thing that creates. It sounds to me. I haven't read the book, and I'm going to. That created the crisis is a pharmaceutical company. And I don't know if you did that by accident or if it's just a prophetic thing, but I think that there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, our nation lives at the drugstore.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter what's wrong with us. If we feel bad, if we feel anxious, if we feel for, I just get a pill. And we know that there's huge money
Yes.
involved here. And I think that there's the realist like my son Andrew who says follow the money.
Hmm.
Who's getting rich? And I know that back during COVID, that was a question I asked over and over again.
Hmm.
You got to figure out who's making the money on this deal because somebody is making a pile of money. They didn't do that stuff for free,
Right.
and somebody got really, really rich. I just, I don't know if that has anything to do with your thinking or not, but boy, I went, wow, that was interesting that this
Yeah.
first,
It was kind of it was funny because when everything happened with COVID and I started to realize, wow, that when I wrote my first book, I obviously I had no idea what would happen a few years
right.
later.
Hmm.
And I started, probably took me, I think, a couple of years. I started writing before it was published,
Well,
uh, and then kind of came out with an updated edition. Um, but yeah, looking back at it afterwards and then reading through it, because one of the things that I didn't do for a while was actually read cover to cover once it was
hmm
finished, and then I think it was a year or two ago, I read through the first book again, and I was like, wow, I can't believe how reading things in here and what had just happened with COVID. And I was like, wow, that's I wasn't even
Well,
thinking about that in particular at the time.
it's amazing how much we are impacted by what's going on around us that we don't realize the depth of which we're impacted by it. So, Jonathan Jaley, thank you very much for coming on. We're about at the end of our hour. I'm fascinated. I'm going to order some of your books. I want to read them so I can give them a good review because I'm always looking for things to recommend to parents, for their kids to read. And it sounds to me like this is something that's going to be really worthwhile to read them. Good luck on your next book. I'm looking forward to see what it's going to be. And I know you have a day job too, and that's always a balance.
Yes.
But we have my daughter Robin says, "Great to hear from you, John." She hasn't seen you in a while, but it's awfully good to see you.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for having me
uh,
on.
oh, listen, I really appreciate it. We'll have you back when you have your next book out. We'll have you back, and we'll talk about it some more. All right.
Sounds
Jonathan Jaley, thank you for being here on Night Mike, especially on our inaugural launch. It's been a very fascinating conversation, and I'm going to let you go now and say thank you very much. God bless.
all right. Thank you. God
Yep.
bless.
Yeah, right. Bye bye. So that was Jonathan P. Jaley from down in Sandwich, Massachusetts, talking about his series of books, the Allegiant series. And I think we uncovered some things that I hadn't realized when I first started exploring this young man and what he's doing and what his calling is. But I hope you enjoyed our program. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I really I'm really excited about doing this little bit different take on things than we do on Live Mic. But next week, I want to remind you, next week is going to be our interview with Phil Felton of the Envoys Gospel Quartet out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Phil's a good friend, very interesting guy, fascinating guy, as a matter of fact, who's been in the gospel music scene for a long time, and just one of the statesmen of that ministry. I'm Michael Gantt. This is Night Mike. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you the next time.